Um, oh, forgot that part. But now we're recording. So this is Robin with the
Hi,
Family
Robin.
Business Program at the Connecticut Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Thanks for joining us. I want to thank Hinckley Allen, who's been a wonderful partner of the Family Business Program for ages. Always appreciate their support and appreciate them sponsoring this because we think these topics are important to privately held and family businesses. So governance is, in some people's estimation, like going to the dentist. So we hope you will enjoy this conversation. I'd like to introduce Jen Doran, who's from Hinckley Allen, and Alexis Dunn, who is with AA Will. I can tell them, they will tell you a little bit about themselves and a lot about governance. And we hope if this piques your interest at the end of it, you'll join us in a couple of weeks to actually do something about the governance in your firm. So I'll kick it off to you, Jen.
Great, thank you. And welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us here today. I am going to share my screen and put up the PowerPoint.
And by the way, if you've got questions, we've got a chat section, so please feel free to put your questions into that. And if it's easier, we can also add you, bring you in to ask your question live.
And to the extent you have questions, feel free to interrupt us because we're happy to take questions as we go through this. So thank you, and thank you, Robin, for setting this up today. My name is Jen Doran. I am one of the partners here at Hinckley Allen, and I'm also the co-chair of our privately held and family-owned business group, which is a multidisciplinary group that we started just last year to really bring together all the components of the law firm that deal with closely held businesses. So it's not just corporate, it's real estate, it's construction, it's trust and estates, it's wills, it's things like that. So I'm joined today by Alexis Dunn, who is the general counsel of AA Will Corporation, which is a Massachusetts-based construction firm that is in its 5th generation of ownership. AA Will started in Massachusetts in 1886, and it's still going strong today, now in its 5th generation, and Alexis is actually a family member as well. So Alexis, do you want to introduce yourself?
I am Alexis Dunn. I'm general counsel for AA Will Corp, and basically Jen summed up everything that we're in our 5th generation, and that's it.
So talk a little bit about the business of AA Will and why you wanted to be join the family business, as it were.
Well, as many of you probably understand, if you grew up in a family business, you don't know much else, right? So my weekends were spent driving around and looking at job sites with my dad and my brother. Honest story, I learned how to ride my bike in a dirt pit, and I didn't know anything else. And growing up, I saw that the construction firm had a lot of engineers and these people that were inclined with math. I wasn't great at math, but I did see that there were other ways that you could help the company. And I decided to go the legal route because as our work became increasingly complex, I did see that there was a need for somebody to guide them through that process. And that's ultimately where I decided to fit myself into working with the family.
Great. And as we're going to talk about today, governance is something that you best start early in the life of the business. I'm sure when your great-great-grandfather was hauling materials around in a horse and wagon, he probably wasn't thinking about too many board meetings. But your family really did adapt over the years to become ever more sophisticated and really just, change with the times to become really one of the prominent construction firms in Massachusetts and in New England today, which is remarkable. So our program today is going to focus on best practices for closely held businesses. And I think it's great that Alexis is here because one of the things that you're probably going to encounter is resistance. And sometimes this resistance can come through your own self of not wanting to deal with these things. And sometimes this resistance comes from, other people in the company who just don't understand the importance of what we're going to talk about today. One of the issues that I often see is that when you start a business, you're not thinking about how do I keep this surviving and avoid issues in 5 years. You're thinking about how do I survive to next week or next month. And so it's, it's hard to spend money. It's hard to spend time talking to lawyers about what are all these things that I should be putting in place when you aren't really sure whether the business is going to be successful. And then once you achieve a level of a success, you say, well, I guess it didn't really matter if I was doing all that stuff because I'm doing just fine. One of the things that I see pretty often is that the people who initially start a business together, they communicate in a certain way, they understand each other, if that gets interrupted, that relationship for any reason, if someone changes, if there's a marriage, if there's a death, things like that, suddenly the business can go adrift because and if it doesn't have formal processes in place that govern what's going to happen, then you can really run into some problems. So Alexis, what are some of the things that you've seen that your family did through those, 5 generations to sort of keep up and adapt to different times as far as, formalizing its structure?
Well, to be honest, so we started in 1886, and one of the things I will give credit to my great, 5 back grandfathers was that they had meticulous record keeping. So we have all of the original ledgers from 1886 that said, 2 horses here, 3 loads of gravel here, because originally our work had just started working on wealthy family estates in Milton, which is a suburb south of Boston. And at that time, that was all we really needed to do. And
what the hell? Sorry.
Oh, okay. So anyways, the original founders of our company was in 1886 was just about meticulous record keeping. And it wasn't until the second generation's man died suddenly in the 1920s that they actually realized they needed to start coming up with some succession planning. And that was really the first step that they had taken in organizing what the company was supposed to look like going forward.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit more about why you should care about what we're talking about today, because I think, let me actually go to that slide. Why should I care? So these are some of the major reasons why governance matters. I think the first one is legal compliance. There's certain things that by law you are supposed to be doing. The second thing is that you're bringing certainty to your business functions. You're understanding, how do I have a meeting? How do I make a decision? What approvals are required? You're also avoiding disputes, because if you have a document that says this is how a decision is made and someone doesn't agree with it, as long as you're following your process of this is what everyone agrees to is the way that we're going to make decisions in this company, you can hopefully avoid some disputes and then prevent litigation down the road. One of the things that, the reason why you formed an entity is so that you have some liability protection. And I think probably the most important reason why you need to pay attention to this is that if you don't keep up that business formality, if you don't, have your annual minutes, if you don't, if you sort of open up a bank account for your company, but sometimes you pay your mortgage out of it, and sometimes you pay your kids' tuition out of it, and you don't really sort of charge back and forth, whether with promissory notes or at least intercompany receivables. Let's just say then that something happens and there's a creditor that has a claim against the company. That creditor can subpoena all your records and say, you're not really acting like a formal business. You're basically treating your bank account like a personal piggy bank. You say that you're an officer, but you never sign anything as if you were actually a business. And so therefore, we don't think that we should respect this business form. And what they can actually do is reach through to your personal assets. And that's really one of the biggest reasons why you need to be careful about your governance. If you do nothing else, it's you want to protect your personal assets. And the more you sort of blur the lines between yourself as a person and the business as an entity, the more you put yourself at risk of that. So that's called piercing the corporate veil. You might have heard that term. And that's something that people really need to be careful of and pay attention to, because the last thing you want to have is a claim against the business that suddenly becomes a claim against your personal assets. As we talked about, you'll often encounter resistance. And so, like I said, a lot of times the resistance comes from yourself, that you just don't feel like doing all these things. Alexis, what are some of the ways that you internally are able to emphasize the need for formal business agreements?
So I think that one of the big misconceptions is that when you have to have like a formal agreement or you have these meeting minutes, that there's a 12 p.m. meeting and it's around a big round desk and everyone sits down and there's someone that's sitting there and taking notes. But for us, I have found that in order to keep everybody in compliance with our meeting minutes and making sure that we do have the right signatory, signing the right contracts, signing the right change orders, is I'll literally walk from my office upstairs, I'll go downstairs, I'll sit between my brother's office on the left-hand side and my dad's office on the right-hand side, and I'll say, this is the issue that we need to talk about today. do you agree with this? Who's going to sign this contract? What are they going to do? I'll get a couple grunts, a semi yes, but enough of a conversation that we're all on the same page. And then I'll just walk to one desk, have him sign it, walk to the other desk and have him sign it. So I think that sometimes it's easier to just dumb it down and make it really simple and really easy and just go to the people that you need to have it sign. Because there would be a lot of pushback if I had to get the two of them to walk upstairs to the conference room and to create this whole formal setup when you don't need that for them to sign a piece of paper and to come to an agreement or quorum on a decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's funny is sort of looking through some of the minute books that we have here at the firm. You know, some of them go back many, many years. And I almost feel like people were more deliberate back in the day about having board meetings, and they have, you know, typed out on a typewriter minutes, and, you know, they would get together in the evenings, and often their banker would be with them, their accountant would be with them. I think that people get away from that today. And I think part of that is the fact that LLCs are so popular now, as opposed to corporations, and LLCs are a little bit looser with some of those, you know, annual requirements. Whereas with a corporation, you're expected every year, no matter what, you have to do those minutes. I can also tell you that we certainly from time to time do what we call catch-up minutes, which might be 10 years worth of minutes in one go, because people haven't paid attention to it. And then you're looking through the minute books and saying, guys, we got to make a record of what we're doing here, at least showing that once a year you're electing officers, you're doing things like that. Let's talk about some of the things. You know, we're talking about governance. We haven't really sort of drilled down on what that actually means. So typically, you'll start out with whatever your formation documents are. You know, in Connecticut, you have articles. In some other states like Delaware, you might have what they call certificates of formation or incorporation. Those are the documents that everyone who has a business is going to have, because that's how you form the business. All of these other things that I'm listing here are things that you need to then create yourself. So if you have a corporation, you'll have bylaws, and bylaws are really, they tend to be pretty standard. It just tends to be a way of, this is how shareholders are going to have meetings. This is how directors are going to have meetings. You might have indemnification provisions in them. They tend to just sort of be a more routine procedural roadmap for the corporation. Operating agreements are what you have with LLCs. And those are a little bit more customized because you can sort of have the elements of the bylaws, but also the elements of the shareholders agreement, which is used in corporations, to really talk about, if you have multiple shareholders, how are those shareholders acting with each other? Does one shareholder have the right to make certain decisions without the other one? Are there things that have to be unanimous? You know, what happens if someone dies? What happens if something happens? Those are the types of things that you'd want to have either in an operating agreement or in a shareholders agreement. And then every year, at a minimum for a corporation, you'll want to have some kind of annual minutes that say, we as shareholders we as directors got together, we elected our officers. And those are things that you should keep somewhere safe. Policies.
Pioneer Family Career Tech is one of them. Want to know if we're interested in a partnership?
Just put them in my voicemail.
Oh, sorry. So policies and procedures are something that you might want to consider as well. Those are just, you know, different things. You might have harassment policies at your business, showing that you're in compliance with the law generally. It's really more of a legal compliance issue, that, you know, you as a business are taking steps to make sure that you have, you know, vacation policies, you have sick day policies, you have harassment policies, attendance policies, things like that. So Alexis, how do you think that governance, sort of all these different governance documents, have helped you throughout the years? Do you think that that's one of the reasons why you've lasted through 5 generations?
I do. I think that document control and the governance of documents is really important for 2 major reasons. So the day-to-day management, right? What's expected of your employees, because you really need to manage expectations, whether that's the harassment policies or your vacation policies. It's really important that everybody's on the same page. And a bigger part of that, for us at least, is for each contract, it's really important for our staff and our employees to know who is responsible for reviewing that contract, who's responsible for signing that contract, and then the day-to-day changes that happen in our field, which we call change orders, who's allowed to sign that. And it's really important for us to have that laid out at the beginning of each project and every year, so that our staff knows what's expected of them. So that in the unfortunate case, if there is an issue that comes up, at least in our experience, it doesn't really rear its head for like 2 or 3 years later. And it's good for us to be able to look back and see who was responsible for those decisions, who was responsible for maintaining document control, and then being able to attack whatever the claim or issue is with an organized structure.
Do you do meeting minutes other than, if you're buying real estate, for example, or if you're dealing with a bank? Do you do meeting? It sounds like you don't do sort of meeting minutes every time there's a meeting.
No. So in our business, we're constantly in contact all day, but we do every year make a point to have meeting minutes. And, unfortunately, we've had to do the catch-up meeting minutes before, but we are at a better regular schedule of doing it now, just so that it's done, it's out of the way. It's literally like a single piece of paper that goes into a manila folder. Sometimes it's scanned in, sometimes it isn't scanned in, but we do have those put together, and we do them for real estate, but we also do them for every contract that we sign. So we know who's allowed to sign the contract or engage in change orders or make any decisions or policies for that specific work.
Mm-hmm. And I know you're a big part of why that's being done regularly now, which is good. I mean, a lot of times I find that businesses, they won't, they'll have the annual minutes, and then it's a matter of, if you're going to the bank to get a loan, typically the bank will want to have, a formal meeting minutes. Same thing if you're buying real estate, if you're doing some kind of, if you're doing an equipment loan, for example, often the lessor will just sort of give you, here's your corporate vote.
Right.
But there's a reason for that. The reason is that they want to make sure that whoever is signing, whoever is agreeing to those things actually has the authority to do it. I mean, that's really the purpose of it. And so I think, like you talked about, Alexis, it's a really good idea to think about who is authorized to do what, so that you might have someone beyond an owner who's authorized to sign something, but you really should make sure that people understand what their limits are. I think a classic example is, hopefully no one out there is a uniform provider, but the uniform providers tend to like to have evergreen contracts that you pretty much can never get out of. And what they'll do is they'll show up at the business and say, I provide your uniforms, front desk person, sign this contract, just to confirm that we're doing this. And then that person has just locked you into like an agreement that has no way out without some severe penalty. And so making sure that people understand, like, don't sign this unless you have the authority, because you don't necessarily know what you're signing, I think can be a good thing. And sometimes we'll have different levels of authority for different things, so that if it's just a, $500 or $1,000, this many people can do it. But if it goes beyond that, you need to have more people authorizing it. And it's a way of sort of bringing that discipline, I think, to your operation, and really thinking about how are we operating as a business? How are we making decisions? And how are we really thinking about what we're sort of obligating ourselves to do, rather than just sort of signing every piece of paper that comes up. And I think that it's really good. It's one thing to have meetings because you're legally required to, and you say, okay, we're gonna check the box and say we had our annual meeting. I really think that the best business practices are to have a meeting because you're getting something out of it. It's never a great idea just to have a meeting because you're supposed to. I think it can be great to have meetings where you're really thinking about, what's the strategy for the next year? What does our business look like? Where are things going? Bring in your outside accountants, bring in your attorneys, bring in your insurance people, depending on what type of business you're in, so that those people can really sit down and strategize with you, so that it's not just some rote, yep, here's my annual thing, but really you're sort of thinking about how you're actually going to do that. So don't just show compliance, but actually proactively think about your business and think about where it's going. And the more people you have who know your business, who can help you with that, I think the better it is. Alexis, how often do you guys meet, sort of big picture, like with outside people, to really strategize? Do you do that very often?
So we have, I would say, 2 big strategy meetings a year, and they're usually around December because we're closing out for our audited financial statement, and that's when we meet with our accountant and the different project executives that we have that are responsible for larger portions of the project. It's also when we do our surety and insurance meetings, is basically between July and December. So we kind of just lump everything in there. But I will say that when we do have an issue that comes up, or we are unsure about the direction of one of the companies that we have is going, we do have a meeting of the minds. We call our Jen, we call our CPA, we bring in all of the different presidents that we have, which is usually just my dad and my brother and the project executives and our controller. And we all sit together, we all get on a phone or the Zoom, that just really aged me, or Zoom, and make sure that we're all on the same page. And for us, it's really important that we have such a good relationship with Hinckley Allen and with our CPA, because they do know our family business, they do know our dynamics, they do know what our goals and objectives are. And it's really important for us to call them and bring them in when we're making any big decisions, so that we're all on the same page and that we have people that we can trust that can say, you know what, this might not be the best idea for you guys in the long run, or maybe navigating the different personalities, because when you do have 2 to 4 family members running a family company, not everybody's going to be on the same page. And when you have outside counsel, it's really important to bring them in so that they can steer the ship in the right direction.
I think that's really important, to make sure that you're formulating relationships with people, so that it's not just, the first time you talk to someone isn't when you have a crisis.
Right.
Because then they have that familiarity with you, they know what you've been through, they understand some of the personalities involved, and can really, I think, help you to a decision better than just sort of coming in cold and meeting someone for the first time and saying, yeah, this is what you should do with the rest of your life, kind of thing. I think having those relationships is really critical. One thing that can sometimes spook people is this idea of, if you're a formal board member, you have certain legal obligations, certain legal duties. One thing that a lot of businesses will put together instead is a board of advisors, which is less formal. The advisors don't have a fiduciary duty to the company. You still want to sign them up with confidentiality agreements and such, but you can sort of bring people on board without that, what can sometimes be intimidating level of responsibility, but instead say, I just want you to come in as an advisor. I want you to understand my business, and I want you to sort of help me, brainstorm about certain ideas from time to time. Sometimes they can be people in your business network. You can really learn a lot from each other, I think, in the business world. And getting together with people under these, confidentiality agreements, and really being free to sort of strategize and talk about different things, I think it can be a great idea to sort of take governance to a different level of, we're not doing this because we're legally required to, but we're doing it because it's going to help our business and take it somewhere different that, just sort of by ourselves, we're not going to be able to get there. So I think that's a great idea. The other thing that I think is really important to think about is the life cycle events. And I was able to put together 4 here that I think are pretty significant, and they all start with the letter D. So it kind of has some nice symmetry to it. So it's death, disability, divorce, and departure. If you have a business with more than one owner, you really need to think about all of these different things. I would say even if you only have one person, you always need to think about what's the next step, because the last thing you want is to have a successful business that gets interrupted by one of these things that you didn't plan for. And so therefore the business just implodes, dissolves, goes away, disappears, and you lose that value. One of the things to always, I hate to be the person who's always thinking of the worst, but it's my job to say, yeah, you guys get along great today, but you might hate each other in 5 years. You might hate the person that your partner is going to marry in 3 years. You might really not like their kids at all. And so those are the things that, as pleasant as it is to have a conversation with me about these things, I think there are things that you really do need to think about in advance. How are we going to deal with these things if they happen? And if they never come true, that's great. You never have to worry about it. But I think it makes sense to try to think about how you would react if one of these things were to happen. And so, Alexis, I know you mentioned this before, that in the 20s, your great grandmother,
great I think, yeah.
And I mean, which is pretty significant. 100 years ago, for a woman to have to take over a business. I mean, do they have any stories about that?
So in the 1920s, the exact year is escaping me at this moment. My whatever, great grandmother, her husband died unexpectedly. She was 6 months pregnant, had 2 young sons, and this construction company essentially to run. And she just took over, ran everything. But this brings a really important point forward, though. They didn't have any succession planning. So my first generation grandfather, when he had passed, it just went on to his son. That son married my great grandmother. And when he died unexpectedly, it really brought it to the forefront that there needed to be some sort of succession planning. She, at that time, I'm not sure if the laws were a little bit more loosey-goosey, was able to continue the business as is until her sons came of age, at which point they took over. And after that generation, so that would actually have been my grandfather, they incorporated in 1950. They created stocks and shares, and they came up with this idea that we need to figure out how this is going to be passed on to the next generation. At that time, there were the 2 sons, which would be my dad and my uncle. And upon my grandfather's demise, it went to my dad and my uncle. But the problem there was my dad was putting in the work and my uncle was in college. And, you know, the family business was still kind of like a summer job, weekend kind of thing. And we learned from that going forward, we had to devise the family business according to who was putting in the most work, who was going to be able to continue the family company in the way, in the tradition that we had wanted it to continue. So I think it's really important for people to sit down and talk to their family and figure out what it is that they want the company to look like, how they're going to organize that, who's the best person to lead it. And just because you have this opportunity to work in your family company doesn't mean you necessarily have to. You can go off and do something different. But if you don't address the issues ahead of time, it can really create a lot of family issues.
Yeah, it's funny. I often ask, I pretty much always ask my clients who have family businesses, do you guys get along? And
it's a good question.
I'm always absolutely shocked when someone says yes, because it's really not the norm. There's always little issues. And I think it's almost magnified because you think about, you know, if you have siblings, the relationship with your siblings, and then bringing that into the workplace, sort of, so all the resentments you had when you were 6 years old,
Yeah.
they get carried through. And some people are really good about managing that. And they're really good about, you know, sort of growing beyond that. I have to say the majority of people probably aren't as good with that. And then when you start throwing in in-laws and children and things like that, it just can become a bit of a mess. And so with your family, it sounds like you're sort of identifying a successor in each generation. Is that sort of how you're looking at it?
Yes. So I think it's really relevant right now because we actually are in the middle of a valuation process where if we're going to get real personal, my older brother and I are 30 years apart. We have different moms. So even though we're technically both part of the 5th generation, he would retire before the 6th generation came up. And so the younger generation is myself and my niece, who are actually closer in age than my brother and I. And we've all sat down, we've all decided that, you know, what the future of the company looks like, how you would maintain business, because the next generation, being me and my niece, wouldn't probably be able to do the same volume because we're still learning, we're still younger. And what the company is going to look like is a really important conversation in determining who's going to run what portion of it and what does that look like. And having the conversation at whatever time benefits everybody's moods is how I do it at my office, because, you know, Friday at 3 p.m. isn't the best time to talk about the future of the company. It's usually 10 a.m. on Monday when everyone's still kind of in a good mood. And it's really important to target those times so that you're having the conversation where cooler heads can prevail. And that's always the good time when you call Jen and rope her into the conversation too, so that she's part of it for when the cooler heads do not prevail, and she can bring everybody back down and have a civil conversation, so that in the event of death or disability or divorce or someone leaving the company, that you already do have a plan, because once you get to that point, it's already critical mass, right? And you're trying to figure out the best way forward. When you don't have a plan, it's going to get incredibly messy. And that's something that we definitely want to avoid.
Yeah, I mean, one of the good strategies that I've seen people use is you can actually have voting and non-voting interest in a company. And
Yep.
So you might say, okay, I want all of the next generation to benefit economically the same, but I'm going to put the voting rights on the person who I think is best capable of leading this company forward. And that can be a way of sort of treating everyone the same from a money perspective, but putting the business in the best hands. Like you said, it's really important for everyone to buy into these decisions, because the last thing you want to do is sort of spring on to someone the fact that, they weren't the one who was chosen to,
Right.
lead this thing forward. And then the resentments build up, and that's usually, surprises are never good in this context. Another thing that I think is a good idea to think about is sort of a formal succession planning document. Is I like to put together what I call contingency or disaster plans, so that especially if you have a smaller business and you end up in a bad accident, God forbid you end up dead, here's a document that says, these are the key relationships. Call this person at this bank. Here's my accountant, here's my lawyer, here's where the will is, here's the key customer relationships that we need to consider and need to make sure that they're in good shape as well. So it's not so much a legally binding document, but it's something that it's almost like a blueprint you would give someone to say, if I'm not here to sort of take care of things, these are the people that you need to contact to make sure that they can sort of step in and do it. It can kind of help you sleep better at night when you have something like that. The key is, number one, make sure at least one or two people know where that document is.
Yep.
Because you don't want to find out after it's too late. And the second thing is you need to look at those. I mean, I have some clients where we literally schedule a meeting every year. Every year in September, we sit down, we go through it. Is it still good? Still good. Make some tweaks if we need to make some tweaks. But you're constantly thinking about how the business is changing, how the important people in the business are coming and going, and you're able to sort of plan for the unexpected. Sort of put the guardrails around it, so then you're a little bit more free to sort of run the business and not, wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking about, oh my God, if this happens, this all goes away. Disability is something, again, thinking about people who can step in, people who can take over in the short term. Would you need to hire someone? Would you need to bring someone else in? Divorce is tricky, because one thing you don't want to necessarily do is allow your, the stock in your company to just be transferable to someone's spouse. Sometimes those relationships can go sour, and you don't suddenly want to find yourself in business with your partner's ex-spouse. And we've actually had situations where people try to assert that right, and often they do it not so much because they care about the business, but because they want to continue to inflict problems. And that can be a very effective way to do it. And so if you have documents that, for example, provide for a buyout of someone's equity, rather than having a court order that equity go to someone's ex-spouse, that can protect the business from that sort of unexpected event. I mean, generally speaking, and this is what you would put either in your shareholders agreement or your operating agreement, or what you would want to have happen if these things were to suddenly occur. So death is something that you need to think about. Who would take over? Does the business go to the family? Does it go to the next generation? And that can require some difficult questions as well, because sometimes the next generation isn't necessarily capable of running the business. I think that in the case of AA Will, you guys were really fortunate that in every generation you had people who were ready to step up and who were ready to sort of continue the business in that way. Not everyone has that. Sometimes you don't have it because you have people who want to do other things, like you said, and sometimes you don't have it because just personality wise it doesn't fit. I won't talk about sort of the entitlement generations, but there's always that perception that the next generation isn't capable of leading, and oftentimes I think people get proved wrong in that regard. Have you guys seen that sort of intergenerational type issues with some of the management?
We've actually been really fortunate where there are a lot of children between everybody, and the ones that want to work in the industry have gravitated towards the industry, and the ones that don't have been supported in their other avenues. My brother, who's 2 years younger than me, is a pastor and has nothing to do with the family business. But my niece and I, she's an engineer and I'm an attorney, and we both gravitated towards it and we both work there. So I think that for our family dynamic, it was really important that we encouraged you to do whatever it was that you wanted to do and that you were going to be successful at, and that you still were kept part of the family without having to work in the family business.
Mhm. Yeah, it can sometimes be intimidating if you're sort of at the kitchen table with everybody and there's one or two people who don't know what's going on, and
Right. Yeah.
they feel left out. But so making sure that people, it's a family first,
Right.
and a business second, I think is the way to address that. The other thing that I always like to plan for is someone's departure. As I said earlier in the talk, people change, circumstances change. Sometimes success changes people quite a bit. I've seen businesses that start out, people really working hard, cobbling things together. And the success of the business can sometimes change someone's personality quite a bit, to the point where they just can't exist together anymore. And always having a way for there to be that exit that is planned for, so that there's a process for it, so that it doesn't happen by someone filing a complaint in a court and trying to partition the business or get a receiver appointed. Those are the bad things that can happen when people stop getting along. And that goes down to have the conversation, put yourself in the mindset of what is the worst thing that could possibly happen, and have that conversation with your business partner as soon as you start the business, and really think about, what if I don't like your kids? What if I don't like your spouse? What if you go crazy? Those are really the things that you want to be planning for. And then that way you have that, then you have that assurance that someone can't just blow something up. You have a process for resolving it, I think is really important.
And
also,
just to dovetail off that, Jen, I want to say that the contingency plan is a really good jumping point for anybody, because you're just talking about, hey, what if you get into a car accident tomorrow and we still need to get this bank loan? Or, what if you get into a car accident tomorrow and you're completely fine, but the last thing you want to talk about is calling the bank? If you just have a Word document that just says, like, in case of emergency, call this person, here's this account number, it can be really, really simple. It's a really good starting point to, great, we have this, but what's our big picture plan? And that's a really great suggestion that Jen made, that we also have, and it's literally just a Word document. So
yeah, and I
it's
try
a
not
good
to
starting
sign
point.
them, because I think, because you don't want to have, the last thing you want, it's almost like competing wills,
Right. Just
you know.
easy. Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you're keeping them current, and they're
Right.
not legally binding. Like I said, it's a plan that you would follow.
Right.
And I just, sometimes I feel like you sleep better at night knowing that you've thought about these things and they're not going to become problems in the future. So
Absolutely.
and then I guess, the final thing I would sort of bring up here, and I couldn't find a way that it started with D, so I didn't add it. I guess it's sort of departure, is when do you sell the business? It's sometimes the partners will agree and sometimes they don't agree. And if they don't agree to sell it, does that mean that one of them has the right to buy out the other one? At what price? Over how much time? A lot of times someone will want to keep the business, but they can't afford to pay for it in one lump sum, in 6 months. And so, are the partners willing to sacrifice a little bit and say, you know what, if I want to leave and you want to stay, I'll buy you out, but give me 5 years to pay for it, or give me 10 years to pay for it, things like that. So that, again, you don't have this constant threat of someone coming in one day and saying, you know what, I'm moving to California, I'm done with this, and I want my half of the business money, and pay it to me right now, otherwise I'm going to go to court. Thinking those things through can really bring some certainty to your future. So Robin, I don't know if we want to open it up to questions, if anyone has any questions about anything we've talked about, or if there's anything in the chat.
Yeah, so one of the questions was, is there a time in the life cycle of the business where, and where does it happen, where you consider not just selling, but bringing in outside management, bringing in executive, because you don't have someone ready? Where does that fall in the process?
So I think you know, a lot of times someone will have a successful business and they'll get to a point where they just don't want to do it for 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 hours a week anymore. I think it's usually good to bring someone in while the founder is still there, or while whoever's running the business currently is still there. Just sort of bring that person in, make sure that they're a good cultural fit, make sure that there's some period of transition time so that you can sort of guide them through the business, make the introductions, make sure the relationships are staying, and then you can sort of ease yourself out of the business. So, you know, I've seen some businesses where, you know, the founders or the owners never want to leave. You know, I've had founders who are 85 years old and they're saying, you know, I'm not letting anybody else in. They're not running this thing. And I've had some people who are 50 and say, you know what, I'm tired, I'm done. So it really, I think, depends on the circumstances. But whenever you make a transition point like that, I think you want to do it with enough time so that you can truly transition it, make sure it's the right fit, so that you're not just sort of turning the business over to somebody, leaving, and then realizing it was a bad choice.
Right. You've probably seen some of a lot of everything.
Yeah, there's yeah, you never know what you're going to get, and some, you know, some outside people can really, I'd like to always have some outside folks come into a business because you bring different ideas. Sometimes if you just have people who have grown up in the business, have never seen anything else, they understand that business really, really well, but they don't necessarily have exposure to other things. And that's where a board of advisors can come in handy. That's where setting up a peer group of similar businesses can come in handy, so that you can get exposure to other ideas, and bring that into your business, even if you don't necessarily want to hire or, you know, bring in a different owner.
Yeah, because it's I know that's what they did down at Lemon Orchards. They brought in a new CEO who's done a remarkable job down there of turning up, and I think they're 9th generation.
Wow.
Yeah, and they still have family working in the business with the new CEO. They made that decision. I don't think they were even considering selling it, but found the time. And so, have we got some questions? I see Jason's got his phone on. Jason, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much for this very insightful, you know, the practical knowledge. My situation is a kind of different. I started out as a young man dealing with high technology, invention and technology. So through these years, I developed software and models. It's primarily intellectual, intangible properties, which has been deployed, used in other industry. And I have a company basically doing this called R&D phase. Basically, we are not interested in, you know, in the immediate profit, but we're investing in technology and development. So I'm getting old now, and I know that this is you know, the things to a proven and case for apply those kind of technology, and we protect it in the trade secrets way. But anyway, I'm considering if I want to retire, you know, what's the best way, you know, if to preserve the value and also continue for somebody better, you know, younger, to continue the value creation.
So there's a couple of ways that you can sort of transition in that type of circumstance. One is, if you have people in the company right now who are able to take it on, who are interested, you know, you can consider doing a sale to them. And, you know, that means that they have to come up with the money to buy it, which can sometimes be a challenge. But depending on, you know, their compensation and things like that, that might be one way to do it. There's also strategic buyers out there. You can go to an investment banker who will locate companies who might be in a similar business who would want to add it on. You might find a private equity company who sees it as a great investment because it complements some other investments that they have. And so an investment banker can help you identify, number one, what's the value of the business, And number
Right.
two, who are the likely buyers? You know, is it someone who does something similar to you, but in a different region? Is it someone who does something similar to you, but you add, you know, a different level of sophistication to it? And so you can do a sale. Sometimes that brings a different culture. You know, a private equity buyer has different priorities, and I'm sure you do. But it is a way to make sure you're getting the value for the business like that. The other thing that people do is if you have a decent number of employees, you can consider what we call an employee stock ownership plan, which is an ESOP, which is a way of sort of transitioning out of the business, having the employees get the benefit of ownership over time. So those are sort of the primary ways that people will exit from a business.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else have questions for us before, because we don't have to stay for the full hour. If we don't have questions, we can go to the what's up next.
Why don't I move to that slide?
There you go. So if you found this interesting and you'd like to work on the governance in your company, we'd like to have you join us in Hartford in a couple of weeks on June 15th. We've got Dean Elliott's going to do some opening remarks about governance and family businesses and privately held businesses. And then we're going to have a working session. So what we want to do is hopefully get you thinking about governance and why it matters, and then come and join us to actually work on a plan. So you walk out after a couple of hours with an action plan to actually create stronger, better governance for your business. And so Jen's going to join us from Hinckley Allen. We'll probably have some other folks, probably drag Bob Zellinger in. And Dan McMahon's going to join us from the Integrated Growth Advisors, who's a business advisor to all sorts of different companies. And so it's going to be a full-on working session with crayons and markers and all sorts of action plans and things like that. So we hope you'll join us. We'll be sending you information on that. We've got a full slate of things coming along in the fall, so we'll have more information coming about that. We're going to have some social networking stuff and some more workshops. So we hope you'll join us at the Family Business Program. There you can find us at family.business.uconn.edu. So I want to thank Hinckley Allen again, especially Jen and Alexa from AA Will. What a great story. And we'll have this up. We've got it recorded so we can add it to our website. So if you think you know people that might be interested, you can have them join us, come and find it and take a look.
Great. Thanks very much, Robin. Really appreciate the opportunity. And to the extent anyone has questions, you know, feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to get in touch.
Yeah, we've got,
Thank you.
we'll have your contact information up on the website as well. So thank you so much. Appreciate everyone's time, and look forward to seeing you in June.
Great. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.